Nesrine Malik is a writer and commentator who was born in Sudan and has lived in Saudi Arabia. Louise Chunn is former editor of The Guardian's women's pages and the founder of welldoing.org, and Laura Bates is the founder of the Everyday Sexism project, which collects women's experiences of gender inequality. Louise Chunn, what do you make of these comments?
It doesn't really reflect my experience living in the UK.
What do you mean?
I think that women, there are problems for women. I quite agree, particularly young women at the moment. But I think by overstating it, by saying it's one of the worst, most sexist cultures in the world, it just makes everybody believe there isn't any. You know, I mean, it just seems ridiculous.
What's your take, presumably, is entirely the opposite?
Not completely the opposite. I would absolutely argue that there is still a huge amount that women in this country are facing, both on the more sexism end of the scale and when you look at sexual violence, and that is often underestimated with a propensity to point the finger elsewhere. But I don't think it's particularly helpful to think about this in terms of one country being worse than another. Women are facing horrendous things all over the world, and the important thing is that we take it seriously everywhere.
Nesrine Malik, how does it seem to you?
Well, it's obviously a bit ridiculous to hear that the UK is considered, more sexist than places like Saudi Arabia or Somalia or Afghanistan. However, I do think she was let down by her expression. I think it is important to understand that there are different grievances everywhere across the world. It's not a competition, and it's certainly not one anybody wants to win. But it is important to watch our language when we talk about these things, because if you're trying to highlight things that you think are sexist but aren't, FGM or honour killings, etc., you need to say it in a way that doesn't have people tune out of the conversation right at the beginning because you've put it in a hyperbolic, unreasonable way.
It is, just look behind you at this screen that some person on the production team has made you sit in front of.
So kindly.
Yes. I'd have been up in arms about that if I was in your shoes, but nonetheless, there we are. These are images with which we are all familiar, and they do represent women in a particular way, don't they? And that, do you don't believe that feeds into anything more sinister?
No, I do. I think the kind of sexualized images of, particularly of younger women, is a real problem. And I speak also as the mother of two girls, so I see it as a real problem. But I think when you overstate it, it doesn't help anybody. And I think, the sort of things that Laura Bates has been doing, I applaud them, I think they're great. But I think we should also remember that we've come such a long way in the time, even I've been around.
Do you think this is a generational thing?
No, I don't think so. I think it's something that women experience of all ages, women of all backgrounds, and in all places as well.
Do you think you face the same degree of sexual harassment as Louise might have done?
I think it's really difficult to say. I think it's not necessarily about comparing, and I think it's really dangerous to kind of go down that road of what things were like at one point. The point is that we are still in a country where 85,000 women are raped annually, where over 2 women are killed every week by a current or former partner, where 1 in 4 women is the victim of domestic violence. So to kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater and say this has been an exaggeration, everything's fine, just isn't accurate at all.
We've made progress, but we've got a long way to go. Is a fair enough argument, isn't it?
No, it is a fair enough argument, but there's also a danger of viewing feminism or criticising sexist culture in the UK and in the West in general only through the prism of images and of popular culture. There's been a move in recent years to talk about feminism and women in terms of page 3, in terms of pornography, in terms of body image, and these pictures that we have behind us. That, I think, sort of hides far more serious issues that people need to speak about, equal pay, maternity leave, the lack of women in boardrooms. And I think that there is a danger that we spend too much time talking about body image and the popular culture of sexism rather than actual practical challenges that aren't FGM, that aren't honour killings, that aren't all these things that obviously aren't happening in the UK, but are practical drawbacks to women's lives every day. It's not fashionable to say that there is a continuum. We should be obviously bothered by all things at the same time, but I'm far less bothered by the imagery of women in popular culture than I am by lack of equal pay, for example.
But it's funny that you mention a continuum, because I think the whole point of this is that the spectrum means these things are all connected. I completely agree with you about the importance of addressing all those issues, but I would argue that the sexualisation of women in the media, that issues like page 3 actually feed into an impact on exactly those areas, on discrimination against women in the workplace, on women in business. Because if we're presenting women in the media sphere as sexualised, dehumanised objects, I think that has a knock-on impact on the way that they're portrayed and the way that they're behaved towards elsewhere.
What do you make of
Well,
it?
I would say that things, what goes around comes around in a way. It's I became the Guardian Women's Page editor at a time when, Madonna was, bestriding the world, and there, people talked about it as a post-feminist time, and it was very difficult. I can remember on the Guardian, people, groaning when I mentioned FGM, one feature in over about 4 years, because everybody wanted it to be lipstick lesbians and how great their sex lives were, and then that grew and grew and grew to the point where, fortunately, people then said, no, this is too much and we don't like this, and this is not about women, showing their power, because that was only about 10 years ago, that was where everything was heading.
I'd like to ask all three of you something. If we wish to shake off, however merited or not, this opinion that has been delivered by the UN Special Rapporteur, what are the practical steps that ought to be being taken by us as a society as a whole? Who'd like to start?
I think one of the most important things, which was one of the issues she raised herself, is the importance of addressing these issues in the classroom. We know from a recent survey, which was also quoted in this report, that 1 in 3 girls aged 16 to 18 experiences unwanted sexual touching in school. And yet we don't have compulsory sex and relationships education that's dealing with issues like consent, like healthy relationships, and like violence. And I think that it's just absolutely vital that we look at implementing that recommendation.
Have you got further suggestions, you two?
I think, as a foreigner and somebody who's come to the UK from a culture where women aren't visible, I'm still shocked at how invisible women are in the public sphere in the UK. And I think something that should be encouraged is to have more women in the media, in government, in the cabinet, visible in influential positions, and not only in a pen of women's issues or women's health issues, or as we are sitting here today talking about sexism. So I think that's an important thing.
Louise?
Well, I think one of the things is that, women have children and they very often want to spend time with them, and that you're always going to run into these problems where women, they may be aiming for those kind of roles, but then they may draw back because there will always be a problem. There's always going to be a tension there that even if all the best childcare in the world is offered, there will be some women who will not want to do that. They will want to spend that time with their children.
But fathers have children too. I mean, there's so much we can do to make that easier for women. Flexible working hours, shared parental leave.
And those are all good advantages that have been made in this country.